twice barreled
Double
special
barrel,
release
single barrel,
malt.
straight
Single barrel,
rye,
bonded.
100 proof.
Barrel proof
Unfiltered
rye.
oak,
Barrel
non-shelf
proof.
oak.
Hello all, and welcome back to Lily Bees. On tonight's episode, we're going to round out the bourbon hunting series of sorts by discussing one thing that I forgot to mention in previous videos, but I feel like it's still appropriate now. And what that is we're going to go through a wide variety of bottles. I've got quite a stack over here off camera, plus these, and we're going to discuss what the differences are in the terms that different labels will use that maybe mean the same thing, or what different terms mean in general. And so I've got these laid out to start with. These are all in one category, and I'm going to do my best to roll through and get as much information as possible. I'm sure I'll miss some things, and if you hear something that I missed or that I was wrong on, make sure to leave a comment down below so that we can get things straightened out. Before we get into that, we've got today's pour, which is Stranahan's Blue Peak. This is a Solera finished single malt from Colorado. This is my first Stranahan's product, and so if you've got this at home or another Stranahan's, or a single malt for that matter, look forward to joining in with you, so cheers. Okay, the first category, I'll set this aside, but I'm just letting it open up a little bit. Our first category tonight is barrel proof. And so I'm going to try and put these up on screen as we get to them so you can see clearly the label and what it says. But what we're going to talk about is barrel proof, and there's a number of words or terms that are used to describe the same thing. You might see cask strength, as in the case with this Maker's 46, and also this Rebel cask strength store pick. You might see barrel proof, or things like full proof. 1792 uses full proof. You might see uncut. Things like that all mean the same thing, and that means that the product is at a higher proof than maybe another offering from that same line. So I've got a Maker's 46 behind me, and then I've got the cask strength of that product. So it's just a higher strength is all that means. You're not cutting the product down with water, with filtered water is the way they do it, to a certain proof point, and proof is simply double the ABV. So, for example, here we have a 110.3 proof, and another fun fact is I think this is a 2021, maybe a 2022 bottle, any of that year for the most part are going to have that same proof, with a couple exceptions, which we'll get into in a second. But this is 110.3, and so all that's telling us is that half of that is what our ABV is, which is 55.15% alcohol by volume. So touching on another product with the same cask strength, that also means that this is a barrel proof product. But this one in particular is also a single barrel. So that, same here with the Jack, this is cask strength, but also single barrel. So what that means is, because this came from a single barrel, and this one here as well, these are going to vary from bottle to bottle. So I don't have two of either of these on hand, but if I did, and if they were from different barrels, they would show slightly different strengths. And so this one says it came from barrel number 22-08841. I might have one that's 08845 or whatever, and I can read the 128.7 proof, and that might be different on the next one. Where with the Makers and other cask strength products that are not single barrel, they're being blended with many different barrels. And I've got one that I'm going to put up here next to give you an example of what that might look like. Getting back to the Blue Peak just for a second. I do consider myself a big single malt fan. There's just great sweetness and surprising complexity that I get from that. Okay, moving on with our single barrel, but also barrel proof. We're kind of going to go from one category and include one bottle that overlaps from each category. I'll do my best here. So, oddly enough, these are all from the same sort of line, I'll call it, of Wild Turkey products. And the one that I wanted to discuss in particular was this rare breed. And the rare breed rye is the same thing. It's just the rye version versus the bourbon version. And I'll touch on that briefly. What that means is in the mash bill, there's at least 51% of whatever it says it is. So this has at least 51% rye grain, and this has at least 51% corn grain. What I wanted to mention these for is because if you search rare breed bourbon, or just rare breed, whatever, every one that you see is going to be 116.8 proof, at least in recent years. And so this is a barrel proof product similar to the makers, but it's blended. I think I read that it's 4, 6, or 6, 8, and 12 year is what they're doing. They're blending that until they meet exactly that 116.8, and then they bottle it. So this is different than small batch, or I guess it technically is a small batch, so they say, but that could be 1,000 gallons or whatever. But it's still that barrel proof. You're just going to see differences because it's not a single barrel. Speaking of single barrel, we have here the Kentucky Spirit, which is a single barrel product, but not barrel proof. So different than our Jack Daniels, which was both single barrel and barrel proof, this is strictly a single barrel product. So that means every time that you see this, if you have a different barrel than the previous one, just like our Jack, but at a different strength, this is going to be different than the one next to it. What's different in the Kentucky Spirit versus the Jack single barrel barrel proof is these will all have the same proof. And the proof point is 101, so 50.5% ABV. Every one, regardless of what barrel it came from, will be that same proof point because it's being cut. So they're cutting it with water to get it to that 50.5% ABV. One final thing regarding single barrel before we move on with terminology is that unlike cask strength or barrel proof or full proof, with single barrel products, as far as I know, that's the only term used to describe that product. So anytime you see single barrel, that's what it is. I don't think that term varies too much, but make sure to let me know down below if that is incorrect. Moving on, we do have a single barrel product, Henry McKenna 10-year, but this gets into our next term that we're going to discuss, which is bottled in bond. And the reason I put these three bottles together is that here we have a single barrel product that's bottled in bond. So what that means, I'll probably mess this up, but in rough terms, that means that it is 100 proof. It was bottled or distilled during one season, and I'm going to get nailed in the comments for this, but it came from one distillery in one season. It was bottled at 100 proof under governmental supervision. So I guess just in simple terms, to me, that means this is a pretty cool product because it's historic. If you look up the Bottled in Bond Act, I think of 1855, it's pretty interesting that they're still carrying that on. And to me, it also just stands for quality in a sense, because they're going the extra step or number of steps to produce a product to follow those same guidelines. So What this is a single barrel once again. So if I had multiple of these and they were from different barrels, it would be similar, but there would be small differences in the product. But because it's bottled in bond, they'll all be 100 proof, and they'll all have to have followed those same guidelines under the Bottled in Bond Act. Another term used to describe bottled in bond might be something like this old granddad bonded. So this is almost always referred to as old granddad bottled in bond, but right here on the label, on the front of the bottle, it's referred to as bonded, and that means the exact same thing. They're just using a different word to refer to the same thing. Finally here I have this Rittenhouse bottled in bond once again, but the reason I put this out here is because different than our single barrel, these two bottles, the Old Grandad and the Rittenhouse, are a blend, and so they're not coming from anywhere near a single barrel. They're being blended to meet that exact same flavor profile every time. So to each their own, but there's a little bit of a difference there where this is more sought after as far as I'm concerned because it's a single barrel product, I think is maybe one reason. So you may be hunting multiple of these because they're all going to be kind of a new surprise, something a little bit different. The final category for today, and I say that because there are a lot of things that I'm missing, but I just wanted to put together kind of the main things that you might see and be unsure about. So hopefully we'll be able to, in future videos, get into some of the terms that I haven't touched on. The final category for today would be finished bourbons, or finished whiskeys, I should say, because we've got a rye and a single malt for 2 out of 3 of these. Actually, 2 ryes. What finished is going to be, it'll be referred to as a variety of different things. In the case of this Cedar Ridge, it's actually called finished. So what that means is that this rye spent most of its time in American oak barrels. I think it's 4 to 5 years. But then, for the end of that period, for maybe the last year, I'd have to read to be exact, but it was moved to a second barrel, which in this case was an estate port wine cask. And that's something else. You'll see cask or barrel, same thing. So this was actually twice barreled, but it's referred to as finished. Speaking of twice barreled, we have this Jack Daniel's twice barreled, and that's the exact same thing. It was put in 2 different barrels, and I didn't do my homework on this, but I think, okay, they're Oloroso sherry finished. So this probably started out in an oak cask, once again, an oak barrel, and then was moved to a sherry cask and finished. So on the small label it does say finished, but the term that you'll commonly hear this called or referred to as is twice barreled. So it's the same thing. These were both in 2 separate barrels before they went to the bottle. Another very common term used to describe the same thing that you'll hear is double oaked. You'll hear that in the case of this Sagamore Spirit. Woodford Reserve has a double oaked, and there are numerous others where it just spends twice as long in one barrel and then it's moved to another barrel, usually one of heavier char to really give it that toasted flavor. And I say toasted because there are bottles such as behind me Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel, or you'll have Nulu Toasted or Penelope Toasted, Michter's Toasted. So that's another common term, but it's the exact same thing where they do toast the barrels differently, or they say they do, but it's spending its time in a double oak, so 2 different barrels, both American oak. So that rounds out the video for today. You see a lot of holes in the cabinet behind me that I need to get put back. And I'm looking forward to the next series of videos that'll be starting, and we've got some big things in the works. So make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for those. Hit the like button, leave any comments that you have down below, and I'll see you on the next video.